So good evening. My name is Gwen Shipley, and I am here with Rick Kelley from Banner Pest Control. I am one of the founders of Save Concord Wildlife. My cohorts, Megan Sinclair and Heather Packard, are going to be jumping in a little later, but they are currently trying to convince the select board of our town to support our article. Like I said, this is about Article 36, which is seeking to a town-wide ban of second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides, otherwise known as SGARs. And so you can see that we have our the official wording of this article that has been accepted by town meeting, and will come up for vote starting on the 2nd of June. As always, it'll be in person voting, and we're hoping it'll go the first night, but we shall see because sometimes town meeting goes to the next one. But so, like I said, we're here tonight to talk about this article and sort of the reasons behind it, but then also looking for, even if the article passes or doesn't pass, there's still ways to stop SGARs from getting into our environments. And so really that's one of our main goals tonight, is to explain in some detail how you can still be rodent-free without using SGARs, these second generation anticoagulants. So let's begin. So these poisons, they threaten wildlife, pets, and human health. And so together, we're hoping to create a safer environment for all of the residents, both human and animal. What are SGARs? You know those black boxes you see so often around buildings? Studies have shown that 96% of bait boxes in Massachusetts contain SGARs. SGARs is short for second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Basically, they're rodent poisons that kill by preventing blood clotting, causing internal bleeding. Because of this, SGARs are banned for retail sale due to the risks to pets and to children. However, also, the town of Concord realizes this and doesn't use them on any of their municipal properties. Every town official that we've talked to says, no, we don't use SGARs, which is great. But they're still widely used by licensed professionals in Massachusetts, and they're also still available for purchase online. So I wanted to just, in the interest of this, to talk about some of the more common ones, because people ask me sometimes, like, is this poison an SGAR? So here are the most common ones. And Rick, I apologize for mispronouncing some of them, but here's what I got. Rotifocum, which is known as mouser or rat tax or talon. Also there's a bromadiolone, which is maki mini block or contract, which is a really common one I know used out in California. There's also difenicum, which is called dekill, or there's difethylone. Whoops, let me try that again. Difethylone, yeah, I'm all right with that. That's first strike or hombre. And so these are the most common ones that are used around here. There are some others, and for an extensive list, you can check our website for that, saveconcordwildlife.org. But also I wanted to just, while we're talking about names of poisons, I wanted to mention this other one called bromethalin, which is not an SGAR. It works differently. It's a neurotoxin, so it actually causes swelling in the nervous system and the spinal cord, so it causes paralysis. But the reason I mention it is because like the SGARs, it also then affects the wildlife. It also bioaccumulates, which brings me to my next point. What is the problem? So these SGARs, as well as the bromethalin, they bioaccumulate. So like DDT's effect on bald eagles and other raptors before its 1972 ban, many people assume that the bait boxes trap the rodent, but they don't. The rodent eats the bait, leaves the box alive, taking the poison into the environment. Since it can take the rodent days to die, the weakened animal may be eaten by a fox, hawk, owl, or even a pet, passing the poison up the food chain. Studies show us that the problem is getting worse. The Tufts Wildlife Clinic has been testing birds of prey for years. In 2011, they reported that 86% of the birds that were brought to their clinic tested positive for SGARs. Then by 2016, the number went up to 96%. And by 2020, 100% of red-tailed hawks tested showed evidence of SGARs in their systems. And it's not only birds that are affected. 98% of fishers have tested positive for SGARs. Dozens of dogs and cats and other household pets also, as well as people. The public health department reports about 100 cases a year, almost half of whom are children under 6. So you can see that this is a problem that is growing, and we are trying to stop that from happening. So is there an alternative? Yes, this is the best part, is that yes, there are ways to do this. They are humane and they're more effective, and they are known as non-SGAR integrated pest management plans, or IPMs. And so they typically include 4 ways to help eliminate rodents. We have exclusion, starvation, targeting, and then as a last resort, you can use poisons. So let me talk a little bit more about each of these steps in more detail. So when we talk about excluding, this really means stopping up the holes, right? You seal the rodent entrances. So the holes, the spaces under the porches, opening where there's cables, pipes, wires. If you have a dumpster that has holes in it, certainly that would be another way to exclude a rodent. Pest control companies are pretty clever. They have this way, rodent droppings actually reflect UV light. And so if you shine a UV light around the building, you can often tell where the burrows are and where they're entering the buildings. And so then if you see like, okay, there must be some hole under here. Or my husband got a little camera on a kind of like a stick, I don't know what it's called. But anyway, he was able to kind of look underneath the eaves and try to figure out where the rodents were coming in. So that's another way to try to find those holes and then stop them up either with copper wire or other ways. Rick might be able to tell us some more soon. And then you can also use non-toxic repellents also that would exclude them. We hear about a lot of people like using fox urine to keep the deer out of their garden. Mints sometimes can keep rodents out of your house too, sort of lining the foundation with some things that smell. And so they come close and they're like, whoa, and then they leave. Again, if the rodents don't come near you, then you don't have yourself a problem. But another way that you can really help is to starve them. So what does this mean? Well, store your food in rodent-proof containers. So for example, we store our birdseed in one of these aluminum cans. So there's no way that the rodent can get in there. Or instead of having a big bag of pet food in your basement, put it into a plastic container. And then the rodents, if they don't have food, then they're not going to come live with you. Another thing that we see a lot are compost bins, which are great. We're all for composting, but if it's open, then that's just a snack or a buffet even for the rodents. So using the closed composters. I like these ones too, because then you can turn it and you don't have to be using the shovel to agitate it, but there are other options as well. And then, of course, covering your garbage cans and your dumpsters. Concord does a great job of, they just given us all these new ones with nice covers. And then also around town, we use these big belly ones that have, there's no way for the squirrels and other rodents to get in there with this kind of a way. So again, we are keeping them out of the way. Another problem that we see, unfortunately, is bird feeders. And so I wanted to just make a special slide because we're here in Concord and people here love to feed birds. And so there's a couple things that you can do. Certainly choose not to feed them. However, some people like to just feed them in the winter time because the rodents are less active, which certainly has some success. Also, some people take in their feeders at night, which is another way to do that. Unfortunately, a lot of times the birds drop a lot of the seed onto the ground, and so then that would be hard to take in every night. But check this out. You can use these things to catch the seeds. You can just put it underneath your bird feeder. Here's a do-it-yourself. You can see she's taken mosquito netting, and then the seed falls in there. And then because it's mesh, the water can drain through, and then she just unties it to clean it out, which is cool. Or you can also buy a kind of a fancier one on online if you'd like to. But again, catching the seeds, certainly the rodents can climb, as you can see in this picture here, but it makes it less likely that they will find this to be an awesome place to eat food. And if there's not a lot of food, there's not a lot of rodents. You can also buy unshelled seeds. We find that this causes a lot less waste to happen on the ground. And certainly, along those lines, the seed mixes really we find generate a lot of waste on the ground because the birds will just go through until they find the seed that they like and they'll just kind of throw the rest out. And so that generates a lot more food for the rodents there on the ground. And then another option is you can, instead of feeding with seeds, you could just try to observe nectar feeding birds like this beautiful Baltimore oriole or hummingbirds as well. We suggest using ant traps because the sugar is very tasty to those ants, but that's just a little, I just have a little, it's like a little well of water that then the ants will drown before they're able to get to my nectar. So those are some options. Another thing, the third part of that pyramid is okay. So you've sealed up all the holes and you've taken away the food sources that you can, but then you can target the rodents without actually using poisons. And so a couple ways, of course, raptors are natural control of rodents. I read this article or this statistic that one owl can eat 1,000 mice in a year. So unfortunately, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by killing the raptors with the poisons, because then the raptors can then eat the mice that keep the mouse population down or the rodent population down. Anyway, and so certainly making your property more attractive to raptors and other birds of prey and other wildlife too, like the fishers and the coyotes and the foxes, certainly can help keep your rodents in check. Snap traps, tried and true, really very effective. Also, they have these new electronic traps where instead of snapping, it gets like a jolt of electricity. Again, there's no poison involved there. There's also rodent contraceptives. The town of Newton is having a lot of success with this, where they don't actually kill the rodent, they just don't let it have any babies. And so therefore the population size remains small and therefore manageable. Another thing that you can do is if you know where their burrows are, again, using either the UV light or other tricks that pest control companies have, and that you can read about, I'm sure. If you put down carbon dioxide or dry ice, then it suffocates the rodents, and it's a humane way. They just go to sleep and don't wake up again. And it's a way to target those rodents and not have any poison that moves up the food chain. And then as a last resort, and for a short-term solution, there are some non-SGAR baits. Again, like I mentioned, you don't want to use the bromethylene because that is bioaccumulates. But Radex, which is a corn gluten-based product, which is what the town of Concord uses on their municipal buildings when they need to use poison after they've excluded and starved and targeted. Or also vitamin D has also been shown to effective. Somebody asked me the other day if she should be nervous about taking vitamin D pills. And I explained that the amount that the mouse would take or the rodent or the rat would take was a much, 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 much higher dose than a human would. So she can continue to take her vitamins. So this is a statewide initiative, right? This is not just Concord doing this. This is all over. And in fact, arguably, a lot of other places as well. But what do we know? Okay, let me find my notes here. All right. We know currently that 9 towns have already passed a home rule petition, and 7 more will vote soon. 24 towns have already reduced SGAR use on municipal properties, including Arlington, Lexington, and Lowell. We're lucky in Concord because, like I said, our municipal properties already are SGAR free. And so we've decided to go for banning for the whole town. At least 81 communities across the state have active groups organizing to reduce SGAR use. So like I said, this is a whole statewide initiative that Concord is joining, and we're hoping that Article 36, if it passes, will then also continue to reduce the amount of SGARs in our environment. So like I said, SGARs are currently not used on municipal properties. So here's a town map, a partial town map, but look, we don't use them in public works, town hall, hunt recreation, but we can't prevent the use of SGARs on private or commercial properties without state approval. So that's why we have Article 31. So a yes vote on Article 31 would allow us to petition the state for a home rule exemption so that we can protect our entire community, not just municipal spaces. Our town can demonstrate to the state that safer, more humane pest management is both possible and necessary. So Concord has a really rich history of conservation, right? We were the first town in the country to ban single-use water bottles. We've also banned checkout line plastic bags. We, have a big legacy here with Thoreau and the other writers here at Walden Pond, and certainly. And so I wanted to kind of remind us of a relatively recent environmental success story that we can see how citizen action can save the lives of animals. According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there were fewer than 500 nesting pairs of bald eagles in the country in 1963. But now, after the DDT ban, there are over 70,000. So we went from 500 to 70,000 breeding pairs, just because of, or the main reason being the banning of DDT pesticides, which caused their eggs to collapse. So let me end with a quote by Margaret Mead. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." So as I said, right now, my colleagues Megan Sinclair and Heather Packard are trying to answer any questions that the select board has about supporting our article. So we are eagerly awaiting that verdict. But we have presented in front of the Climate Action Committee, and they have agreed to support our article, as has the National Resource Commission here in Concord. And then finally, Mass Audubon has also. We also presented to the League of Women Voters on Friday, and so we're hoping that they will also lend their support to our article. So at this point, I wanted to open it up to questions, but just to let us know that if you wanted to learn more, we have Save Concord Wildlife, which is, again, the Concord one. Rescue Raptors is sort of an over umbrella for some of the statewide initiatives, certainly not all of them, but many of them fall under this umbrella. And Heather Packard is one of the staff members in charge of that. And then if you wanted to learn more about Banner Pest Control, we also have Rick's website right here. And then I got all clever and I made QR codes. So feel free to use those as well. Because you can't just click on a Zoom, right? But you can take a picture of the QR code. So I was feeling impressive. All right. So with that, I'm going to take a breath. And let's see what questions we have. Did I tell Rick, did I tell people that you're second generation, that your father started the company? Did I tell people that? Rick Kelley, his father started the company and he's been working there since what, 16?
About that. Yeah,
about that. Yeah. And so tell me, do you use SGARs?
I do not. I do not currently use SGARs, no.
Why not?
I mean, a year ago, or 2 years, this wasn't a conversation or that came up. It just never was. I mean, customers weren't asking. SGARs have been the industry standard since the 70s, I think. So it's what I was trained on. It's what I grew up using. It's what everyone else, what all the training classes, seminars use. So, and then nobody was asking. This conversation wasn't a thing before. And then it started becoming a thing, and social media, it started gaining steam. And I fought it just like all my colleagues did. And because SGARs, they're easy, they're cheap, they're effective, there's no question. And then you just start to see the posts, and it became impossible to ignore. Customers were asking every single day, and I didn't have the answer, because it was always, what happens to the mice when they do get out? And it's just, I don't know. I didn't have those answers. Nobody really did. So, and then the city of Lowell, where I do a lot of work, started this whole process of taking SGARs out of municipal properties where I do a lot of work. Mm-hmm. So then I had to find a solution, that I didn't know of one. So I called a few other company owners in California, where this had already been pretty statewide, and just started the conversation. And then meeting with Jane Newhouse from Newhouse Wildlife was a big one. I think I saw one of her presentations, and it was just, from there, it was a no-brainer. The reports she had, the photos she had, and then it was just an easy decision at that point. So I haven't used a single one since November of last year, and it's been fine. There's other ways to do it, and that they work just as well.
And a lot of people ask me, like, is there a big cost effective? Are you losing money because you're not using SGARs?
No, that was a fear with everybody. And if you don't know any different, at first, maybe some of the newer products might be a little more expensive, but it's very cost comparative. Cool. It does take a lot more, thought process, and you just have to be a lot more careful and intentional with the methods. It's not like just showing up to a home and putting SGARs everywhere, the basement, attic, outside, all over the place. It's going to work. Other products, you just have to be a lot more careful and a lot more intentional and just sort of, put some thought into it a little bit, but it works. It's great.
Yeah. Cool. Interesting. Yeah. And so a lot of, there's some concern, actually not a lot of concern that I've heard, but certainly I've heard some concern that there'll be some pushback from the pest control companies if this ban does go into effect. Yeah. And I wonder if you could just maybe speak a little bit from possibly their perspective, how you may have answered this a couple of years ago. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there was pushback from me. I was one of them. And it's just because we didn't know any different. Like I said, I think my father threw me in the truck at 16 with a bucket of bromadiolone and final and contract, and it was just SGARs. That's it. That's all we used. So it's all I knew, and I knew it to be effective. And I knew the cost involved. I knew what it took to work. And when this conversation started becoming, like I said, I was against it also. But it's just, it's then having to kind of do the research and find what else was out there and what else worked, and then kind of start trying some different things. I didn't have a lot of faith, I'll be honest. And then when I kind of started to see it working, and then even at the end of the day, I think be a little cheaper in the long run. Interesting. Because now you have to educate the customer. There's a lot more outside controls you have to implement, and food storage was a big one with homeowners and things like that. So when you're educating the customer and they know what they need to do, we know what we need to do, it's 100% effective. But like I said, it takes a little bit more thought and care, but it works.
Another concern that somebody brought up to me, which I thought was interesting, is, if as a pest control company, I put out the SGARs, right, whatever one I choose, then I would have to come back and replenish that, right, and check it out. Whereas arguably your technique of excluding and storing the food differently, et cetera, will reduce the population. And then maybe after a while, they don't need you anymore. Is that going to be a problem in terms of your customer base?
If they don't need me anymore?
I don't know. Is that true? I don't know.
I mean, that's always the goal. You want to get rid of the pests. You want to educate them on what they can do in the future. And if you're honest and upfront, they'll be a customer for life. The strategy is, let's get rid of them for a few months. Let's make sure they come back next fall so you can call me back. If that's what it's about, you're doing it wrong. And if you're honest and do it that way, they'll keep calling you, because there's plenty of other stuff out there they can call for. Trust me.
So true. True. Oh my goodness. I realized that I didn't invite anyone from the audience to ask questions. I'm sorry. I've just been asking Rick here, but feel free to just jump in. I realize sometimes you raise your hand, you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. And let me just check my notes, because I had some other questions that I wanted to ask too.
Sure.
Oh yeah, Carrie, you got one?
Yeah, I just, what are some of the methods that Rick uses that, I mean, you kind of outlined that in your presentation. Is that his approach, this integrated pest management approach? It is, okay.
Yeah, I mean, everything that Gwen talked about is implemented. Exclusion, trapping, contraceptives have been working surprisingly well. That was another thing I didn't have a lot of faith in. But using it now consistently under, that paired with exclusion, trapping, vitamin D3 when needed also is just as effective. That does not show any signs of secondary poisoning. It is still a rodenticide. You have to be careful, but that's a fantastic alternative.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and somebody had asked me too, Rick, like how would you handle like a farm versus a restaurant versus a home? Maybe you could speak to a little bit of like differing strategies based on your client. So
the farms are so those big black boxes outside that everyone seems to be afraid of, they can be configured a number of ways. And your percentage that you showed was shocking. Was it 96%? 96%. So
the big boxes, but sometimes those boxes have snap traps in them. We got a little, we get thrown sometimes. So I see a bait box, but it may have a snap trap in it. Sorry.
Yeah. So I use them also, the big black boxes. I understand the stigma it has, and people don't like to see them, but I have very clear labels: no poison, no SGARs. I just will put traps in them. I'll put the contraceptive in them. And as long as they're serviced once or twice a month, it works fantastic. So farms and restaurants is great, because you're catching the rodents, and then you're also kind of stopping the breeding, and you're just kind of naturally decreasing the population in the area. It works great on farms and sort of larger scale properties. Restaurants the same. Anything that, because the contraceptive, they do have to feed on it. It's just like a birth control, every like once a month or once every 20 something days. So you have to stay on top of it. Now with homeowners, nobody wants me in their home once every 28 days forever. So it doesn't really work that way. So then you have to, traps, exclusion, the D3 in some cases in small amounts works great. And then also, like I said, inspecting the home and finding out why mice are there, what they're doing, what they're after, and then helping the homeowner make the right decisions to, help just expedite the process. And then, prevention in the future, it's great and works fine. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So okay, interesting. Because I didn't realize that those boxes don't always have bait in them.
Mine don't. Mine don't. But I mean, I have very clear labels stating otherwise. A lot of them aren't labeled, or they're labeled inside the cover. So I understand if you can't see what's in it, it's, be curious.
Yeah. And now I had heard that you had to put labels on them, but I think that's just inside. I don't know. Do you know what the
somewhere on there, if there's a poison being used, it has to have the information somewhere on the box.
Oh, but not necessarily outside.
There's there's a lot of trouble with labels outside these boxes. They just they wear and tear with the season. So it's tough, but somewhere in there, a lot of them are inside the cover.
Yeah. Although honestly, I'm not going to be opening those boxes, but I would hopefully not need to. All right, so let's see, what else did I have? Okay. Oh, somebody had asked me before this about the statewide initiative, and just sort of going more into detail. So I just want to take a little bit of a turn here, and talk a little bit about that for a moment, which is, so all of these towns are under Heather Packard. Oh, hello, Heather. I was just about to talk about the statewide initiative. But so, the more towns, certainly right now, a town does not have the ability to ban SGARs on their property because there's a statewide law about sort of the freedom of letting the pest control companies use what they'd like. So what we are trying to do is, in our town, is to say, okay, we understand that, but for our community, we'd like an exception because our community is very environmentally minded, and we would like to protect our nature and our natural wildlife. And so certainly that's something that a lot of towns have done, as you saw from my slide. What is it? 9 currently passed, 7 more in the running. A lot of towns are also asking the municipality to choose not to, just like I can choose as in my own home not to, or in my own business not to. We're asking the towns to not do that. So that's one sort of grassroots kind of effort to that. And then a second one is that the state has been hearing all of this, and now there's actually a bill in front of the state to ban them statewide. And so that's going through all the processes right now. It's at the Joint Committee for Nature and the Environment, I believe it's called. And so they are deliberating over it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's sort of a traditional way, and then it goes through and I don't know the whole process, but eventually, hopefully, it'll get to the governor's desk, and then she'll sign it, and that will be that. But then there's a third way too, which I hadn't realized, but there is, I'm going to look at my notes here to just get it right. And luckily Heather's here to help me. But there is a pesticide board subcommittee under the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. And so they are also independently looking into and doing some scientific review of all the studies to look at, can we stop, not allow people to use it, even professionals, because of the risk to wildlife and also pets and humans. And so that's a third way that would not go through the governor's, it wouldn't be through there, but it would be just through the pesticide board itself. And so that's the third way. So, and then of course, my favorite way is the fourth way, which is the education, right? Is that just the more people, even if there's not a law, I don't use them. And I'm hoping that people who are listening to this webinar will choose to not do that, because there are more effective ways and other ways to use that. And so we hope that that's what happens. Hey, Heather, how'd it go over there with the select board?
Good. Majority voted to in favor.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's great news. Excellent.
Yeah, it was good.
Nice. All right, so excellent. All right, let's see what other questions that we thought. So Heather, we were just we had a couple questions from the audience, but then I also was just trying to think back about what people ask me often, and I would say that the number one question that I get is there an alternative, right? Which is sort of what the point of this webinar is. But I think too, I feel like some of my people I've talked to, like I just say, oh, it's easy. You just call your pest control company and ask them not to use SGARs. But then, so then I was like, wait a minute, I should probably try this myself before I'm suggesting that people do this, right? So I just, picked a pest control company and called it. And I was like, hey, I'm looking to, get the rodents out of my home. Could you do so without using SGARs, right? And some of the companies were like, sure, we're happy to do that. Some of them even like Rick says, well, yes, by design, I don't use SGARs. But I did get a couple where they were like, well, no, we use SGARs. That's what we use. Right? Which is what Rick was saying. It's just like, that's what they do. And so what we've decided on our website is we actually have a list of at least, I think what's currently up to 4 companies who come to Concord and service Concord and are more than happy to either, they don't use any SGARs ever, like Rick, Banner Pest, but also, or just are more than willing and if the customer says, don't use SGARs. And so I was trying to make it easier for people. You just
You
call
want
them
to
up.
make sure, I didn't look at that webpage, but you should make sure anyone who contacts those companies, most companies, unlike Banner Pest, you do have to ask, or they will default still to SGARs.
Yes.
You have to
I will make a
advocate
note
for it. Mhm.
Yeah. Let me make a note to myself about that I need to make sure that's on there.
Yeah, we've
Default.
discovered that because like if it's not their standard practice, which is only just a handful that don't use SGARs, the rest, if the customer doesn't ask, they just use them. That's what they do.
Yeah.
Even
Because
though they do know the alternative sometimes.
Yep.
I have bumped into a few who were willing to use SGARs, but didn't, or use something else, but weren't, were asking me what those alternatives were. Like they didn't know them.
Right? Like Rick was saying, right? It takes a little bit of a learning curve on your part, right?
Yeah.
No, very true. Yeah. And so then we tried to do some of the work for the Concord residents and Concord business owners, just to know, like, A, they come to our town, right? And B, that they are willing to just do that. So that is what we're hoping, that the more people who do that, the better for our owls and birds and fishers and coyotes and foxes and pets. So, another question that I get a lot, or not a lot, but another question that I get is about pets, right? And they're like, well, how does the pet get into the SGAR, right? And so I don't know, Rick, do you have thoughts on this? How would a pet or even a kid get into an SGAR thing? Right there in the boxes.
I mean, if it's done right, they never should. So for starters, it gets placed in these little lock boxes, those little triangle boxes. I'm sure you're familiar. And then the placement needs to be a place that behind appliances, areas that you don't just put them, along the baseboards in a living room. You got to kind of tuck them away, hide them. So you have to be careful both ways. Make sure it's in the proper station, locked, heavy duty, and then placed completely out of sight, out of mind, inaccessible, ideally.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, I mean, and in schools, they're not even allowed to put SGARs inside the building. Right.
The kids are on the playgrounds.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And the other problem I think that exists is that rodents are by nature, just like any rodent, like squirrels or chipmunks. Everyone knows a squirrel, chipmunk finds food. What do they do with it? Well, they take it out and bury it. They hide it. They run around with it. That's what they do. And rats and mice are in the same rodent family. And so they, by nature, are not going to just eat that bait inside a bait station. They're going to carry it out. And so the bait isn't always, I think that there sometimes is direct for primary ingestion of these rodenticides by pets or possibly children, God forbid. But it's because they're not always in the bait station. And of course, we know the real big problem is that the rat eats it and then they eat the rat. So they're getting poisoned by eating something else that ate it because it bioaccumulates. But
Yep.
they also get busted open. So if too often, I think I have never had a group who in any town who's gone around and looked for bait stations who hasn't found one that's at least one, if not more, that are busted open.
Mhm.
So they don't always are not always well maintained by pest control companies because they're using what is supposed to be a short-term solution for an infestation as long-term preventative rodent control. These plastic bin, these plastic boxes that they're put in outside, the big black boxes, are they're plastic. And so if you leave them out for years, they eventually get brittle and old and will like get cracked or busted open. I also see them sometimes where, because they put a lot of them around dumpsters where there's big dump trucks that pull up. And I think sometimes they've gotten run over. It looked like one I saw.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's a variety of reasons that might happen, but they do get busted open by, and it's accident or it's, from neglect or whatever, poor maintenance, but it certainly wasn't, and I'm sure intentional by the pest control company initially when it was first set down. It was put out as, following the rules, but
Mhm.
whether it was ignored or whatever, accidentally hit by a dump truck, it's, sadly, they get busted open sometimes.
Yep.
You've surely seen that sometimes, right, Rick?
I have.
Oh yeah, it happens.
Yeah, I mean, they get busted open, so they're
Sure.
not, if
Yeah.
they're maintained properly, they
Right.
won't, but although even that, like I said, if a truck runs over it, I mean,
It happens. Yeah. But like you said, they have to be maintained, they have to be watched, and it's usually a non-issue. As long as you're on top of it, it should be okay.
Right. Yeah.
but you can put other products in it that even if they get busted or open, don't harm wildlife and children. So
Right.
it's still a better solution.
Yes.
So true. So true. Yeah. So Heather, what other kind of questions do you get asked a lot that might be helpful to have on this webinar?
People are often concerned that if they don't use rodenticides, these particular like SGARs that people have become so dependent on, that there's going to be a big, when you switch, there'll be a huge increase in the number of rodents that you'll see, like this massive, I kind of joke sometimes and call it Ratmageddon, just like a ton of rats. And so Rick, you've done this, you've taken people off of SGARs probably in the last months, right?
Yeah, of course.
And have you, what are their experiences with this?
It's been status quo. It's just as effective, if not. People are skeptical for sure, because you hear these, these words that it's safe for wildlife and organic, and people translate that to doesn't work, not effective, which I get. And then I just say, I'll prove it, and then it's fine. As long the stations work. The D3 works great. The contraceptive works great, and those old snap traps, those tried and true ones, are just as effective. Yeah. So.
Yep.
When you're using contraceptive, are you using Evolve or Good Bites?
I haven't tried Good Bites yet. I've just started looking into that. Mostly Evolve right now, which I find that works really well. It's very palatable. It works great, and then it also works wonderful as a bait for the traps. It's I love it so far. Yeah.
Oh, bait for the snap trap.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great idea.
Yeah. How do you get it to stick?
So the Evolve looks like an uncooked like sausage.
Yeah, I agree. They call it pellets, but it looks like little sausages.
Yeah. So if you open it, it's like a meat. It's a soft, almost like a Play-Doh consistency, and it molds really well to the triggers of the snap traps. And it's been the best bait I've used. So it works awesome.
Brilliant.
That's fascinating. What a great idea. I love this idea. I literally was just in Haverhill today talking about it. I love the idea of combining the two.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's really clever. Because then you get some, smart rat who doesn't trigger the trap, right? But then they're eating that. So,
right.
Hey, you know what? I don't know. And I don't know if you know this, Rick, but I feel like, the birth control pill, right, just stops the female from being fertile. But does the does the, whatever it's called, Evolve, does it do both male and female?
I think it does.
It does.
Yeah.
Both the males and females are infertile for about 45 days.
Right.
Wow.
So it really is a great, if you are working with pest control companies, who have concerns about kind of, I don't know, like their business model being effective without SGARs.
Yes.
I think using, reminding them that long-term rodent control is never going away. Bottom line, we're not talking about they're not going extinct here. So, what we really need is to have less of them, right? So that they aren't a pest. And when they're like, it's when they get into your buildings that they're a problem. So where I think this contraceptive idea is it's new. It's only been like what 2.5 years or so that they've had contraceptives out. I think it's pretty new, but they're still figuring it out. But it has a lot of potential, and I think there eventually will be a lot more competitors out there. I only know of 2. That's why I was asking if you knew of others. I only know of Evolve and Good Bites right now that are pellets, and then there's a liquid version called Contrapest, but it freezes in the winter. So
Yeah, that one didn't work out. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't thinking about
They didn't
Maybe in
that
New
one.
Orleans, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So so I think it has a lot of potential, and the bigger cities have been really leaning into it. I know Newton and Boston. I think Lowell have been talking about it, right? Have you done any in Lowell?
There's been some talks, nothing quite official yet with it, but some talks.
Yeah, that's great. They'll have to lean into something though in Lowell without it on municipal properties. So.
Yeah, Lowell keeps me busy.
I bet. Yeah. So that's exciting. Those are I think that's the big one, this fear of like a ton of rats if you transition.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think we have this visceral fear of rats, right? I mean, it's like human nature in some way. And
another question I realize, Heather, that I get often is like people are like, we don't have rats in Concord. We do. And certainly mice as well. And so I would love to have fewer rats in Concord without having fewer owls and fishers and foxes in Concord, right? That would be my
I think homeowners who aren't in town center probably deal more with mice than they do with rats. And so I think that's why there's that perception. If you own a restaurant in town center, I bet I don't know if anyone on here owns a restaurant in town center, but that I think they would have a different opinion.
And, I mean, just makes sense, right? Close up the dumpsters and and keep the food, you don't want to share the food with the rats, right? So those are logical things that help, and I think that I heard a story of this one woman who had rats in Cambridge, and she just pulled in, she had been feeding, bird feeding, and she was like, yeah, it was amazing. I just stopped feeding the birds and the rats went away. I was like,
Imagine that.
That's the sad truth. You probably, I saw you were presenting about that. But people who, if you haven't done anything to rodent proof that bird feeder, which some people do because they're trying to they don't think of rats and mice, but they're trying to keep the squirrels out, right? Some people have like squirrel and chipmunk proof their bird feeders, which also it will help with rats and mice. They're all rodents, but most people don't, and so then you don't see them because it's at night, but all day you're feeding your beautiful songbirds and all night you're feeding your mice and rats.
So would the mouse come out of my house to go to my bird feeder and then go back in my house?
You've attracted the mouse to that space, and now they have found foods in your house probably.
Well, not my house, Heather. My house is mouse free.
Right. Yeah, I don't believe that of any house in Concord. I live in Concord.
No, but my husband has been working really hard with his snap traps and his copper wires and everything.
Yes, I have a little exclusion project myself that I need to work on in my house.
Yep.
But I have cats, so that's another rodent control option.
Yeah, that's right.
Mice never get far if they do get in, but I don't like them getting in. That's why I want to I figured out a spot where I think they're getting in. Because I hate it when the cats get them. It's all kind of gruesome.
Yeah.
And they torture them for hours, like at least with the snap trap, or, it's like my cats are not treating them like a snap trap. It's hours and hours of torture all night. Yeah. So while we Mass Audubon, we say that we are not in, we don't recommend, we're obviously, we know rodent control is going to need to happen and we're going to kill mice and rats when we do it, but we want to do it humanely. Right. And so that's why we say no glue traps. And we actually haven't been recommending electronic traps. I don't know if you knew that.
Right? Oh, I didn't. Are they not as abrupt?
Yeah. So it turns out that it takes like 2 minutes of electrocution because it's not electrocuting their like brainstem. It's electrocuting, it's creating a full circuit through their feet. and it takes 2 minutes of like extreme pain before they die. And so the veterinary associations and such are saying electronic traps are inhumane, and so we've stopped recommending them.
All right, I will pull that out of my PowerPoint right
Yeah,
now.
I just recently pulled it out of mine.
Oh, there you go. Huh.
We're always learning.
Yep.
But I mean, I think there's all different ways that people do this, and I think that if they're making an effort to do something that doesn't, those SGARs are clearly the worst, and because of the way they never break down and they get into the food system, the whole food web. But anything we can do to better balance our ecosystem by housing and feeding these rodents less and increasing raptor and predator friendly habitat, simultaneously, because we're actually making it more and more imbalanced. The more we feed and house our rodents, and the more the poison we're using on them is killing the raptors and predators, right? We're like constantly making it more imbalanced.
Yep.
It's always going to have, because we're humans, there's always going to be overhousing and feeding of rodent populations to have an unbalanced ecosystem with the predator ratio. Like, it's never going to be perfect. Why we need rodent control. But anything we can do to lessen the housing thing through exclusion and sanitation, less house, less food means less rodents. And healthier rodents actually means healthy habitat for your raptors. Like, I want really good, healthy food for them. That's why I love the rodent contraceptives. It's really healthy. It's good for them. And it helps them have less of them. So it's a great combo too for that reason. Like,
right. And I mean, it's not like then the owl becomes infertile from eating a rat that's eaten the
no, they've not shown.
Egyptian.
Although I will say there haven't been, because it's so new, there haven't been really strong, like thorough third-party independent studies on all the impacts animals who eat them could have. But all indications, and people that ornithologists I've talked to have said certainly raptors are just not biologically similar enough that a contraceptive for a rodent.
Right.
We'll say almost guaranteed there are infertile chipmunks running around. There's nothing that a rat can get into that a chipmunk can't. And they're close enough, that they're both small mammal rodents. I bet there's some infertile chipmunks, but it doesn't sterilize them. Remember that. They're only infertile for 45 days.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah. So they'd have to keep coming back and eating at that same, at the bait station.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think, sort of the overall that we're hearing, and really like the title of this webinar is that there are safer alternatives, right? And that we're not saying live with your rats and mice. We're saying, hey, let's do what we need to do as humans and protect our homes and businesses without hurting the wildlife, right? And that's really what Article 36 is about and what this whole movement is about. Yeah. What do you think? Is that a good way to end? We could stop recording. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah. And I put a prompt in the chat, if anyone hadn't noticed it, about it takes you to Mass Audubon's poison free
Nice
page that has our pyramid and info and other hyperlinks there, so you can check them out.
Oh yeah, and wait, before you stop, I'm just going to put up our Rescue Raptor thing. I use the QR codes, right? I'm just going to end with that so people can, if they wanted to hire Rick, or if they wanted to learn more Rescue Raptors, or just here in Concord to Safe Concord Wildlife. And anyone who wants a yard sign, please go on our website and send us an email, info@concordwildlife.org. And we would love to give you a yard sign to support Article 36. Thanks, everyone.